Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Caroline Garnett McGraw, and I work with The Clearing, which is a non 12-step dual diagnosis residential addiction treatment center located on the beautiful San Juan Island in Washington State. And what do we do here? In the words of one of our participants, we learn how not to hate ourselves anymore. And that's a really important work. I think we could all agree in this day and age, that's an important thing to learn how to do. So today we're going to talk about adoption trauma and how to heal. And before we dive into that, I just want to clarify our terms for a minute. So when people say the word trauma, there are a couple of different definitions that come to mind. So there's a medical definition in terms of your physical body and a traumatic experience like a car accident and the kind of trauma that you incur on your physical body. But when we're talking about mental and emotional trauma, we're talking about something that's not as measurable on the outside. In fact, it's purely subjective. Mental and emotional trauma is something that was shocking or deeply upsetting to you personally. It does not matter if someone else who had that same experience right alongside you didn't see it the same way. You can have an identical twin go through the same experience, and one of you will register it as traumatic and one of you won't. That is the mystery of trauma. It's purely subjective. So, what could be traumatic about adoption? Isn't adoption a beautiful thing? Absolutely. Yes, it certainly can be. It can be a lifeline and an amazing opportunity for both adoptive parents and adoptees as well. So, there is tremendous joy in it. There can also be some pain, and that's what we want to explore today, without negating all of the positives and all the wonderful aspects of adoption. So on the parent side, if you're the birth parent and you decide that adoption is the best course for your child, then you could have some inner conflict about the choice to allow your child to be adopted. And if that's not something that you resolve, the trauma of that, you can carry that with you for many years to come. And on the child side, it depends a lot on the circumstance of your adoption and also the age at which you were adopted. Because thanks to developmental psychologists like Erik Erikson, we know that humans progress through different developmental stages psychologically at different age brackets. So for example, from ages 0 to 3, from birth to age 3, you're learning trust versus mistrust. You're establishing whether you trust people in the world. And you're going to carry those lessons with you through the rest of your life on a really subconscious level, because obviously most of us don't remember back to when we were newborns or 3-year-olds. But you're learning these lessons and you're learning to interpret the world through a certain set of eyes. So again, depending on the circumstances of your adoption, depending on your age of adoption, if you have a sudden, permanent, and really sort of catastrophic separation from your birth parent at that early age, that can be very traumatic for you. But again, let me remind you of the definition of trauma. It might not be traumatic for one infant, and it might be very traumatic for another. So we cannot always necessarily predict it. And I also will add a caveat that it's not always so linear in that, say you have someone who is in a very negative and unhealthy family situation, and then they're adopted and they go to a very positive and loving and nurturing family situation. So you would think, how could that be traumatic? They're going from a negative to a positive. But you have to be able to dive a little deeper than that and understand that even if the child is leaving a very negative environment, that's what they know. That's their home. That's where they feel, in some ways, they feel safe, even if that environment is unsafe. It's safe in the sense that it's known. It's familiar. And so it can be very destabilizing to move into a completely new environment and have completely new caregivers, even if those caregivers are fabulous and are giving you phenomenal care, and even if it's absolutely the best place for you in life. So just wanted to unpack that a little bit. and realize that this is not about blame. It's not about blaming the birth parents or the adopted parents or the child. It's just about acknowledging all of the different forces that are in play here, and that each person can register those forces in a different way depending on their personality, their temperament, their past, all of these different factors. So again, the larger point is that a sudden loss or separation from your family of origin, even if it's a negative situation, can be traumatic for a young child. In fact, we also know that there is a connection to addiction in terms of having adoption trauma, because researchers at the University of Minnesota have shown that children who are adopted are, I believe it's 1.8 times more likely to eventually develop substance abuse issues than the general population. So that's somewhat indicative that this early trauma influences their later predilections to addiction. However, it is also important to note that studies have also shown that adoption gives a ton of positive outcomes, and most adoptees are very well adjusted. This is not saying that most people who are adopted then go on to develop substance abuse issues. It is saying that there is a higher rate than the overall population, perhaps because there is a higher instance of early life trauma. So, how do we heal from this? Where do we go from here? If you're on either side, if you're the parent or you're the child, and you're carrying around this traumatic event, how do you heal from it? Well, there are a couple of principles to keep in mind. And the first is that we can't change the past. We can't go back in a time machine, as far as we know, and go back and fundamentally alter the events of your past. But what we can do is alter the way that you hold them in your consciousness. So I'll say that again. You can't change the events of your past, but you can change the way that you hold them in your consciousness. You can change the way that you think and feel about them. And that is, on one hand, it's a decision, but on the other hand, it's also work. It's work to uncover your beliefs about what happened to you in your past, and it's work to decide that you want to change them and practice and create some new beliefs for yourself. It can be done though, and often it's a lot simpler than people think it is, because here's the secret. If you work with the first time that you've ever felt a certain way, so for example, if you're dealing with adoption trauma and you have felt abandoned for most of your life, you just felt abandoned by your birth parents. If you work with the first time that you can remember feeling that deep down sense of abandonment, then you can then heal all of the other times after that where you felt that feeling. If you dig down to the root and you look at where did this feeling start, where did this originate, then the healing from that ripples out to all of the other times that you have felt that way. It's pretty cool. So even when people come in and they might say, oh my gosh, I have so much healing to do, years and years, and I'll never get through it, and it just seems really overwhelming. But if you go back to that first memory, what you might find is there might only be a dozen or a couple dozen things that you need to work with. And then you could be so much better off. It's amazing. Anyway, the second and final point I want to make about healing, it is about adjusting the way that you hold events in your consciousness. And the way that you do that is by applying love to the parts of yourself that hurt. So you don't make a change in how you hold an event by saying, you need to make a change. You need to shape up and get over it. No, that sounds more like a drill sergeant. Think about how you would comfort a young child who came to you in distress. What would you do if they had fallen off their bike and skinned their knees and they ran to you? You would hold them. You would comfort them. You would speak gently and kindly to them. You would call for help if you needed some more help. You would reassure them. You would praise them for being brave, for trying to ride the bike. We all know this instinctively. We know how to act and how to provide that loving and supportive space for a vulnerable being. And the really cool thing is when you can make that shift and realize I have that vulnerable being within myself. And if I can offer myself love and compassion, then I can heal. So I hope that's been helpful. Thank you for watching. And in the comments, I will post a link to our new Healing Underlying Core Issues Facebook group. This is a place where you can connect with like-minded people if you want to talk more about a given subject like adoption trauma, childhood trauma, healing hurts, dual diagnosis treatment, any of these great topics. That is a good place to do it and connect. So again, I'll post the link in the comments. And until next time, have a great day.